She blew a whistle at me. A long, shrill, referee-style whistle, as if I had just committed a foul on her sacred beach lot. I blinked, one flip-flop still dangling from my foot, as this 60-something woman in a sun visor and too much perfume charged toward me like I had personally insulted her ancestors. She didn't know me. She didn't ask who I was. She just pointed a trembling finger at the sand beneath my toes and barked, "You don't belong here. This is private HOA property. You need to leave." And in that surreal, sunscreen-scented moment, I realized something incredible. Karen had no idea she was standing on my beach. It had been 10 years since I last walked this shoreline. My grandfather's beach cottage sat just beyond the dune path, quiet and salt-worn. Life had kept me away, college, career, relationships that fizzled and burned. But after his passing, the attorney's letter came with keys, maps, and a single sentence that changed everything. You now own the coastal property from Marker 19A to the pier, including associated riparian right. In short, the entire eastern shoreline. This beach, this lot, this view was mine. And I hadn't even unpacked yet before the first confrontation began. Karen stood with the righteous confidence of a queen who believed she had ruled unchallenged for decades. Her lawn chair sat anchored in the sand like a throne. A tiny yappy dog with a rhinestone collar growled from her side. She wore a giant hat that looked like it could double as an awning and a sash, an actual sash, that read HOA Volunteer in big blocky letters. I had to suppress a laugh. It was barely 8 a.m. I gave her a polite smile. "Morning. I'm just taking a walk. This is the public easement trail, right?" She clucked her tongue. "That trail ends at the palm fence. You've crossed onto the HOA-maintained private beach. We fund this area. Our residents pay dues to keep it pristine. You're not a resident." I turned and looked down the empty shoreline. A kid nearby was building a sandcastle. A couple walked hand in hand. It wasn't exactly gated. There were no ropes, no clear borders. But apparently Karen's borders were invisible and deeply emotional. "I live just up the dune," I said, gesturing casually. "My grandfather's place. The Rivera house." Karen stiffened. Her lips twitched. "That old shack still standing, huh? I thought the county condemned that after the hurricane." She laughed like it was a joke only she understood. "Nope," I said lightly. "Still standing. And legally occupied. Just moved back in yesterday." "Well, you still can't be on this part of the beach. Rules are rules, young lady." I raised an eyebrow. "And what rule exactly is that?" Karen's eyes narrowed. HOA Regulation 17C. Non-residents are not permitted past the dune border without a guest pass or written permission. I didn't have the energy to correct her, not yet. So instead I nodded. "Noted. Thanks for the heads up." Then, as I turned to continue walking, only about 10 feet away, mind you, she reached into her oversized tote and pulled out a small plastic horn. And she blew it. Not a metaphorical horn. An actual plastic horn that sounded like a toy kazoo possessed by a demon. People on the beach stopped what they were doing. The kid dropped his shovel. The couple paused mid-step. And I, mortified and completely stunned, turned back to find Karen marching toward me like a mall security guard chasing down a serial thief. "Ma'am, I am giving you an official warning," she said loudly enough for the dolphins offshore to hear. "If you do not vacate this area immediately, I will be forced to notify community enforcement. You are in violation." I stared at her for a long beat. Then said, "Community enforcement, you mean the HOA newsletter guy in flip-flop?" Her nostrils flared. "We have protocols." At that point, a man with a clipboard approached, mid-40s, sunburned, wearing a neon yellow vest that read volunteer compliance. He had the awkward energy of someone who didn't want to be there. Karen motioned to him like she had just summoned backup. "This woman is trespassing," she announced. "She's not in the HOA. She's from the condemned house." The man looked at me. Are you with the Rivera place?" "Yes." He blinked. "I thought that was sold years ago." "Nope. I inherited it." Karen scoffed. Sure you did. I reached into my beach bag and pulled out the keys, holding them up. Real metal, real rust. The kind only old houses produce. Feel free to check the address. I'll be walking my beach now. Karen sputtered like a lawnmower on its last pull. You mean our beach? You don't get to claim. But I was already walking away. The clipboard guy scratched his head and followed me for a few steps, then gave up halfway through a half-hearted "you should check with the board." I didn't respond. Because I knew something they didn't. Not only did I own that shack on the dune, I owned every grain of sand Karen just tried to kick me off of. Later that night, I stood in the living room of my grandfather's cottage, staring at the framed deed on the wall. He had hung it there himself, probably just to annoy the neighbors. The frame was crooked, and the document was faded, but the words were still legible. Coastal Parcel 71C through 74G, including direct beach frontage and shoreline jurisdiction. Owned by the Rivera family in full. I had spent the afternoon reading through the fine print, zoning codes, and county record. Karen wasn't just mistaken. She and her HOA had been technically trespassing for years. The so-called private beach wasn't HOA maintained. The HOA had zero legal access to the parcel. Their little signs, rope fences, and beach patrols were all a lie, held together by the assumption that nobody would challenge them. Until now. I picked up my glass of wine, clinked it gently against the edge of the frame, and muttered, "Cheers, Grandpa." Outside, the tide rolled in slow and steady. Tomorrow, I'd let them know exactly who owned the horizon. But for now, I let the silence wrap around me like a secret waiting to be revealed. And somewhere, not far away, Karen was probably polishing her whistle for round 2. The next morning began with the rhythmic thump of a hammer on wood, which wasn't mine. I opened my cottage window to find Karen and a couple of HOA volunteers hammering tiny wooden signs into the sand along a rough imaginary border just a few steps from the edge of my dune. Private HOA Beach, the signs read in red paint, with a comically stern graphic of a person walking with a big red X over them. As if that wasn't ridiculous enough, they strung up a thin nylon rope between the signs like it was a medieval barrier meant to repel invaders. It waved lazily in the sea breeze, barely higher than my knees. I strolled down barefoot, sipping coffee, and stood at the edge of their new barrier. Karen turned with a smirk, sunglasses perched high like a soldier inspecting a border checkpoint. "Well, good morning," she said, voice sugary and poisonous all at once. "Just ensuring our community space stays protected." The HOA voted to reinforce the boundary. Nothing personal. I squinted at the rope, then at the signs, then back at her. "This rope is crooked," I said. "Your X is lopsided. And that stick is in my sand." Karen's smile didn't move. "This is HOA jurisdiction. And unless you've got a pass, you'll need to walk back to the trail. No loitering." I leaned against one of the posts just to watch her twitch. "I live here. Remember you tried to have me escorted yesterday. That was before the signs were up. Now they clearly mark the protected space. Protected from what? Sand erosion or people with working brain cells?" She gave a theatrical gasp and turned to her lackeys. "Did you hear that she's being aggressive? Again. This is why we need stricter controls." "You're roping off public coastline," I said. "This isn't even legal." Karen shook her head. "The HOA has consulted with our legal team. The beach is maintained by community funds, so we're within our rights. You don't have a legal team. You have Steve the mailman pretending to be treasurer." At that moment, a man with a camera phone ambled up, clearly watching the exchange. One of Karen's volunteers handed him a flyer titled "Beach Use Regulations." I looked at it and nearly choked. Rule 9 actually read, "Unauthorized persons may be photographed and reported to the HOA office for record-keeping." "You're joking," I said. Karen didn't flinch. "Documentation protects our liability." I took a step forward and ducked under the rope like it wasn't even there. Karen gasped. She reached for her whistle. I raised a hand. "Before you blow that again and scare another child off the sand, maybe consider this. You have no authority here. I'm not in your HOA. And this isn't your beach. It was the first time I saw her mask slip. Just for a second. Then it snapped back into place. Enjoy your walk, she said coldly. But know that consequences are coming. That night, an envelope appeared at my door. No postage. Just slipped under the mat like a passive-aggressive ninja had left it. Inside was a folded paper labeled HOA Hearing Notice. I laughed so hard I dropped it in the sink. They were holding a formal hearing regarding my violations of community standard. Specifically, 1 count of unauthorized beach use, 1 count of defacing signage, and 1 count of inappropriate language directed at a board member. The next evening I went. Not because I cared what they thought, but because I knew it would be fun. The meeting took place in the HOA clubhouse, a badly ventilated community room that smelled like mothballs and overcooked coffee. Foldable chairs formed a circle, and Karen sat at the head of the table like she was presiding over an ancient tribunal. There were maybe 12 people in attendance, mostly retirees. 1 woman knitting, 1 man nodding off, and Steve, the fake treasurer, sweating through a polo shirt. We're here to discuss the disruptive behavior of a non-member, Karen announced. She pointed to me like I was a defendant in a courtroom drama. Miss Rivera has repeatedly trespassed onto our beach, violated signage, and threatened our sense of community with hostility. I raised a hand. I'd like to point out I'm not a member of this HOA, and therefore, none of these rules apply to me. Karen waved a printout. But you live within the perimeter of our influence. The what? The influence zone. It's outlined on this map. She held up what looked like a hand-drawn sketch in highlighter over a Google screenshot. That's not a map. That's a napkin with Wi-Fi lines drawn on it. There were chuckles. Karen looked annoyed. The point is, we believe in shared responsibility. And if you're going to reside near our community, you need to follow community rules. That's funny, I said, because I brought something too. I stood, reached into my bag, and pulled out a folder. It contained the deed, the parcel maps, the zoning confirmation, and a recent property survey. All verified by the county. This is my property. From the edge of the dune to the rocks by the pier. That includes the lot where you planted your signs. And this hearing has 0 legal standing. Dead silence. 1 man muttered, "Wait, the HOA doesn't own the beach." Karen turned red. That's impossible. We've maintained it for years. Maintaining and owning are very different things. Karen snatched the folder from the table and began flipping through it like the pages might suddenly declare her queen of the coast. But the stamps were clear. County seal. Parcel confirmation. My grandfather's signature. The knitting lady gave a little whistle. Well, I'll be damned. The sleepy man finally woke up. Does this mean we've been fined for using her beach? Karen tried to salvage the moment. This doesn't change anything. The beach is still vital to our community, and her behavior. I gathered my folder, slung my bag over my shoulder, and gave them a little wave. Thanks for the entertainment, folks. I'll be on my beach if you need me. And with that, I left a room full of people who had just learned the queen they followed was sitting on a cardboard throne. 2 days passed before Karen retaliated. I had just stepped outside with a coffee mug when I noticed a county vehicle parked halfway up the access trail. A man in khakis and a clipboard stood at the edge of my property, tapping his pen against a yellow notepad. His shirt had a zoning and code compliance pat. Behind him stood Karen, arms crossed, lips pursed so tightly they looked like they'd collapse inward. Her smug expression said everything before she did. "Good morning," she chirped. "You might want to put that coffee down. This could take a while." The inspector introduced himself, stating they had received a complaint about illegal construction and unpermitted utilities. I blinked at him. I haven't even fixed the loose board on the porch yet. What construction? He flipped his notes and read aloud. Unregulated septic runoff. Unauthorized electrical modifications. Non-code compliant staircases. Possible illegal subletting. It sounded like someone had thrown a dart at a wall full of violations and reported every word it landed on. Karen hovered nearby, pretending to check her watch. I invited him in. The place was old, yes. Weathered, absolutely. But Grandpa was meticulous. I handed the inspector the binder of original permits and 2 years of maintenance records. He walked through the property, checked the fuse box, the plumbing, even the sand erosion buffers. When he returned to his truck, he gave Karen a blank look and said, "Ma'am, this property is fully up to code." She blinked like she had just been slapped with a fish. I couldn't resist. "Would you like a copy of the permit index too?" Karen. She didn't respond. She stomped back up the trail so hard her little dog had to run to keep up. The next morning, I discovered the opera. Not the genre. The performance. Karen had positioned 2 large waterproof Bluetooth speakers at the corner of her backyard, just within her property line but facing mine. At 6:55 a.m. sharp, a booming Italian soprano screamed through the dunes. It was loud enough to startle seagulls and shake my windows. I opened my door to see her lounging in a sun chair with a mimosa, reading a gardening magazine as if the sonic warfare wasn't happening. I waved. She didn't. I endured it for a day. On the second day, I made some adjustments. I called a friend who did custom landscape automation and asked for something specific. That night, we buried a motion-activated sprinkler system along the dune path leading to my stretch of beach. Then we added a small ultrasonic animal deterrent, which emitted a high-pitched tone only audible to dogs and certain frequencies of irritation. The next morning, I made pancakes and waited. Karen, unaware of the new system, marched out with her clipboard to inspect her invisible border. She stepped directly into the detection zone. The sprinklers hissed, then sprayed a glorious arc of cold water over her feet and legs. She yelped, spun around, and the little dog began barking furiously. Then came the ultrasonic screech, and the dog bolted, yanking Karen face-first into the wet sand. I had to close the curtain so she wouldn't see me laughing. Of course, she called the sheriff. I stood at the door in shorts and a t-shirt when the deputy arrived. Karen paced behind him, soaked from the knees down, her hair matted and mascara beginning to smudge. She was yelling something about targeted harassment and unsafe weaponized gardening equipment. The deputy, an older man with a calm drawl, asked to see my setup. I showed him the sprinkler system. Motion triggered. Set well within my property. Clearly marked with a sign, "Warning, wet area ahead." Then I showed him the animal deterrent, which was also labeled and adjustable in frequency. All legal, all harmless. He sighed, nodded, and turned to Karen. "Ma'am, nothing here violates code. You stepped onto her land. Again." Karen's jaw clenched. Her voice rose. "This is coordinated psychological warfare." The deputy gave her a long, tired look. "Ma'am, respectfully, this is a garden." Karen left muttering threats about lawsuits, ordinances, and possibly the Geneva Convention. That night, I sat outside with a blanket and watched the moonlit wave. For a moment, I wondered what exactly Karen thought she was defending. The HOA had no true claim to the beach, no legal authority over me. But her pride ran deeper than any regulation. She had ruled by assumption for so long, she couldn't handle the idea that someone new, especially someone younger, someone not part of her echo chamber, had just reset the whole game. I had already installed a beach cam by then. Not obvious. Just tucked into an old lantern mounted on the cottage porch, facing the shoreline. Motion triggered, HD resolution. I didn't want footage for revenge. I wanted proof. Because something told me Karen wasn't done. And sure enough, a few nights later, she struck again. Just after midnight, the motion alert pinged my phone. I pulled up the feed. There she was, creeping down the dune trail in her bathrobe and sandals, holding a long umbrella like a sword. She reached the shore, looked around, and began snapping the sprinkler heads off one by one, stuffing them into a canvas bag. The camera caught every second, her grumbling, the scraping sounds, the moment she stepped into a sand pit and nearly toppled over. The feed even recorded her cursing at a crab. I downloaded the footage and saved it in 3 places. Then I did what any calm, collected, slightly wicked person would do. I clipped the funniest 30 seconds, muted it, added some beach ukulele music, and anonymously uploaded it to the neighborhood social group with the caption, "The HOA Queen claims the ocean." By morning, it had over 600 views. Comments flooded in. "Is that Karen in her pajamas? She's breaking her own rules. Someone should give her a volunteer badge for crab patrol." Karen did not speak to me for 2 full days. Which, honestly, was the closest thing to peace I had experienced since I arrived. But I knew silence from her wasn't surrender. It was the calm before the next ridiculous storm. And I was more than ready. I owned this beach, this view, and every inch of sand she was trying to control. Let her play her games. I had patience, and a second sprinkler system just waiting in the box. The beach was quiet the next morning, unusually so. I walked down with my sandals in hand, expecting the usual Karen-related chaos, but instead found the rope barrier gone, the signs removed, and no opera echoing from her backyard. That would have been a win if it didn't immediately feel like a setup. Karen didn't give up, she recalibrated. And when she went silent, it meant something louder was coming. Later that afternoon, an envelope arrived by courier, not the postman. It was thick, cream-colored, and formal-looking, addressed to me in a sharp serif font. Inside was a letter from the HOA's supposed legal advisor, stating that the board intended to pursue legal action regarding access rights to the beach and alleging that I was obstructing long-held community traditions by installing motion sensors and deterrents. I stared at the page for a full minute before laughing out loud. Community traditions. Like trespassing, surveillance, and musical warfare. I made 2 calls. First to my actual attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Lynn who lived to tear apart fake legal threat. Second, to the zoning board liaison I'd been emailing since I inherited the property. He confirmed what I already knew. Not only did the HOA have 0 jurisdiction over my parcel, they had likely violated environmental codes by constructing fixtures like benches and cabanas on my land without permit. The kicker came when he casually mentioned that several complaints had already been filed by residents about Karen. By evening, I had my response. A formal cease and desist order drawn up and printed, addressed directly to the HOA board. It was simple, direct, and backed by county records and my property deed. I signed it with a flourish, walked it down the path, and slid it under the clubhouse door. I half expected to hear Karen screech from a window like a castle which catching a curse slip through her gates. 2 hours later, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Joel, one of the more reasonable HOA members, holding a bottle of wine and a sheepish look. "Sorry to barge in," he said, "but I think we should talk." He came in and we sat on the porch, the bottle open between us. Joel explained that Karen had strong-armed most of the board into her personal crusade. Over the years, she created a false narrative that the HOA had rights to the beach through verbal agreements and implied maintenance. No one had ever checked the records. No one questioned her. They just followed her lead because it was easier than challenging her. "Until you moved in," he added. "Now people are realizing she never had the authority she claimed. And she's losing it. She called an emergency meeting today and tried to introduce a motion to restrict beach access to only card-holding residents." "But that's not legal," I said. "Exactly. And for the first time, people told her no." I nodded slowly, then smiled. The cracks were forming. The next day, I began putting up my own signage. Not petty signs, not traps or scare tactics. Real signs, printed, laminated, posted on cedar stakes. Private property. Shoreline owned and maintained by Rivera Estate. Access by written permission only. One at the path entrance. One midway along the dune. One by the rocks near the pier. I kept it professional and clear. I was no longer playing defense. This was my line in the sand. Karen saw the first sign while walking her dog and stopped cold. She stared at it for a full minute, then whipped out her phone, presumably to photograph it as evidence for her next neighborhood tantrum. But she didn't speak to me. Not that day. The silence broke the following morning at a town council zoning forum. I wasn't planning to attend originally, but the agenda listed shoreline access regulation and HOA dispute. And I had a hunch. I arrived early, dressed for war in calm neutrals, and sat in the second row. Sure enough, Karen showed up 15 minutes late, holding a color-coded binder and wearing a scarf that looked suspiciously like a flag. The meeting dragged for an hour before public comment opened. Karen stood immediately, stepping to the microphone with the energy of a woman about to deliver her Broadway debut. She launched into a monologue about beach stewardship, the importance of preserving community order, and the terrifying rise of unregulated property owners abusing their right. She gestured vaguely in my direction without naming names, but everyone in the room understood. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, walked to the mic, and calmly recited the parcel numbers, the boundaries of my property, and the HOA's lack of jurisdiction. I quoted from the county records. Then I looked at the room and said, "I've been harassed, surveilled, photographed, falsely cited, and whistle-blown while walking my own beach. I'm not disrupting community order. I'm defending legal property." Karen was visibly fuming by the time I sat down. Her binder trembled in her hands. Then something remarkable happened. A woman from the HOA board stood up and said, "We were told we had shared access, but we were never shown proof. And now I realize we've been misled." Others nodded. Karen sputtered, "Are you all turning on me? You never told us the beach wasn't part of the HOA," someone muttered. "You said your cousin helped draft the rules." I saw the flicker of fear behind her eyes. Karen had been ruling on borrowed time and imagined power, and now it was slipping through her fingers like dry sand. After the meeting, one of the zoning officers approached me. Quietly, he said they would be reviewing the structures placed along the shoreline. If the HOA had built anything without permits, they would have to tear it down. That included benches, shade canopies, and the ornamental fence installed last spring. By sunset, Karen's once unchallenged reign had turned brittle. The HOA members were grumbling. The zoning board had taken interest. And I had laid my foundation with quiet, unshakable logic. That night, I stood at the water's edge as the waves lapped up onto my beach, mine by every measure of the law. I listened to the wind and smiled. Karen had built her empire on assumption. I had built mine on paper, patience, and the truth. And the tide was turning. The real shift began when the trucks arrived. Not Karen's, not the HOA's, but mine. Bright and early on a Saturday morning, 2 landscaping vehicles pulled into the access road and began unloading equipment. A small team of contractors moved efficiently, placing stakes, laying out mesh, and marking paths with biodegradable paint. It took less than an hour before the first beachgoers stopped and stared, then began whispering among themselves. By 10, I had my first official visitor, Karen. She stormed down the trail like she was about to deliver an eviction notice. Her visor was tilted, her sandals were snapping against the sand, and she was already red in the face. She marched right up to one of the workers and demanded to speak with whoever was in charge. I stepped out of the shade near the porch and waved. Her face fell the moment she saw me in a polo and clipboard, looking exactly like someone in charge. "What is this?" she snapped. "What are you doing to the beach?" "Good morning to you too," I said, walking over. "I'm installing a coastal eco-trail. Minimal impact, erosion-friendly, public access path. Fully compliant with the county's shoreline improvement program." She blinked. "Public, you can't open this to the public. This is a private beach." "Not your private beach," I said. "My private beach, which I'm now opening to visitors through appointment or permission under land stewardship regulations. There'll be educational signs, benches made from recycled wood, even a spot for sea turtle monitoring. It's all approved." Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. She looked around at the signs being hammered in. Wildlife area, no trash beyond this point, coastal dune restoration project. All of it had the subtle but unmistakable glow of official support. She pointed at one. "Who approved this?" "The county." I smiled. And the Coastal Conservancy. They're actually funding part of it. Turns out, when you let an HOA claim dominion over a public-facing parcel for 10 years, the county gets real interested in who actually owns it. She turned a deep shade of crimson. This is sabotage. You're doing this to humiliate me. I shook my head. I'm doing this to protect the land my grandfather left me. But if the truth is embarrassing, that's not my fault. She stalked off without another word, her dog yapping behind her. I watched her leave, then turned back to the crew. The work continued, undisturbed. By noon, the first few families arrived. Not HOA members, but guests who had signed up via the QR code I posted online. A pair of retired teachers brought binoculars for bird watching. A mother with 2 kids helped them collect shells along the wet line. All respectful, all grateful. I walked among them and felt something I hadn't in weeks, peace. Later that afternoon, the HOA board held a hastily scheduled emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, obviously, but a little bird sent me a video clip of what unfolded. Karen stood at the front of the clubhouse, waving her binder, screaming about eco-trails, interlopers, and community betrayal. Several members tried to speak, but she shouted over them until one of the newer residents stood and calmly asked, "Is the beach yours?" Karen froze. He repeated the question. "Is it? Do we have the deed? Is there proof in the bylaws? Because if not, then maybe we need to stop pretending we're in charge of something we don't own." Silence. Then someone clapped. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was enough. Karen dropped the binder and stormed out. The video ended there, but the message was clear. Her grip on the HOA had cracked. The next few days were a blur. Visitors increased. Comments rolled in on my project blog. A small article ran in the local paper titled "Local Woman Reclaims Family Shoreline, Embraces Eco-Revival." Karen tried to spin a counter-narrative, distributing a flyer that read "Warning Community Safety Alert, Unauthorized Trail Project May Attract Strangers." But her warning backfired. More people showed up, curious, kind, and eager to support what they saw as a positive change. That week, 3 separate HOA members contacted me privately. One offered to donate benches. Another asked if their daughter could volunteer as part of a school service project. And the third asked the quietest, most telling question of all. How do I get permission to access the beach properly? Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling. I caught her one morning standing by the trail entrance, yelling at a family trying to take photos near the dunes. She demanded to see identification. The mother calmly pointed to the sign that read "Entry with permission only" and showed her the printed access pass. Karen turned on her heel and walked away, muttering something about legal action. But she looked smaller that day. Deflated. Then came the inspection. The zoning officer I had spoken with weeks ago arrived with 2 colleagues, walking slowly along the stretch of beach that once bore HOA signage. They measured, photographed, took notes. 2 days later, Karen received a citation for unauthorized construction of 3 fixed benches, an unpermitted seawall extension, and the illegal installation of floodlights that violated local turtle nesting protections. The fines were steep. The removal orders were non-negotiable. I watched from my porch as a crew dismantled the benches. Karen stood by, arms crossed, eyes hollow. No one came to help. Not one HOA member defended her. She was alone with her fake authority, watching it fall apart piece by piece. By the end of the week, the beach looked different. Cleaner. Freer. No more signs, no fake ropes, no suspicious looks from clipboard-carrying volunteers. The trail signs stood proudly now, blending into the dunes like they'd always belonged. And the best part was the quiet. Not just the sound of waves, but the absence of resistance, of bitterness. Karen had lost her power, and the beach had finally returned to what it always was, something meant to be shared, respected, and protected. I took a walk at sunset, the sand warm beneath my feet. A small child ran past me with a kite, parents smiling a few steps behind. I nodded to them, and they waved. The air smelled like salt and jasmine. The sky bled orange into purple. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt like I wasn't fighting anymore. I was just home. It started with music. Not opera this time, but party music. Blaring bass, clapping beats, some electronic remix of an early 2000s pop song. I looked up from my coffee and nearly choked. A full beach party had erupted overnight, right on my shoreline. Tiki torches were jammed into the sand like crooked spears, streamers flapped in the wind, and an inflatable arch reading HOA Summer Bash bobbed above a table stacked with cheap soda and cupcake. People were arriving with fold-out chairs, coolers, and one guy with a karaoke mic strapped to his belt like a sidearm. And right in the center of it all stood Karen, arms raised like she was welcoming pilgrims to her holy land. I stared for a moment, making sure I wasn't hallucinating. Then I picked up my phone and called Lynn, my lawyer. She answered before the second ring. "Tell me this is about the party. I already got 5 texts. You're not crazy. She really went through with it. How fast can you meet me?" I asked. An hour later, Lynn and a county sheriff arrived in separate cars. We walked down together, moving slowly so as not to disturb the gathering chaos. Karen spotted us halfway down and her smile vanished. She pushed through the crowd and met us at the edge of the dune, where she planted her feet firmly and said with all the fake grace she could summon, "Good morning. Can I help you?" Lynn stepped forward. "Yes, you can help by vacating this property. You're trespassing. All of you." Karen laughed, but it was thin and shaky. "Oh please, it's a harmless community celebration. We've always done our beach event here." "Not on this land you haven't," Lynn said. "You received a cease and desist letter. You ignored it. You received zoning citations. You ignored those too. Today, you are in direct violation of the court order posted 2 days ago." Karen froze. Her eyes darted between Lynn and the sheriff, as if trying to read a bluff that didn't exist. The sheriff held up a document. "You've been officially served. The court granted an injunction based on unlawful occupation and defiance of private property right. You are now required to vacate the premises immediately. Anyone refusing to leave may be cited or detained." There was a beat of silence. Then someone behind Karen muttered, "Wait, what, she didn't tell us that." A woman holding a cupcake stepped forward. "You said it was okay. You said the county couldn't stop us." Karen waved a hand. "It's all being challenged. Legal gray area. They're overreacting." Lynn shook her head. "Not gray. Not even beige. Just black and white. This beach doesn't belong to you or the HOA. It never has." The sheriff looked at Karen. "Ma'am, we can do this politely. Or I can escort you myself." Karen's mouth opened and closed. She turned to the crowd for support, but they were already backing away. No one wanted a citation. People picked up their chairs, grabbed their drinks, and started heading toward the parking lot. Within minutes, the music was off, the torches were yanked out of the sand, and the inflatable arch deflated with a soft, sad hiss. Karen didn't move. She stood there with the same stubborn, hollow expression she wore the day her fake signs were pulled up, as if she could will everything back into her control with one furious glare. The sheriff took a slow step forward. "Ma'am." She flinched, then turned and walked off the beach without another word. Her flip-flops slapped against the sand in angry rhythm. It was the last time she ever set foot on my shoreline. The next week was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced since arriving. No flyers appeared under my door. No patrol volunteers loitered near the trail. The HOA clubhouse was shuttered for a full weekend, and rumor had it Karen had stepped down. Voluntarily, if you believed her letter. Under pressure, if you listened to the whispers. I didn't gloat. There was no need. The land had spoken for itself. The lies had fallen away. All that remained was truth and tide. I finished the eco-trail project by midsummer. Volunteers helped plant native grasses and flowers. We built a small wooden bench from salvaged driftwood and carved a plaque into it, in memory of Rafael Rivera, for the peace he protected and the land he loved. Every time I sat there, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The visitors kept coming, but not in crowds. Just families, nature lovers, curious locals. People who respected the signs and left no trash. Some even brought thank you note. One little girl drew a picture of the beach with a giant smiling sun and handed it to me shyly before running back to her mom. I pinned it to the corkboard inside the cottage. One morning, a familiar face approached me on the trail. Joel, the board member who had first warned me about Karen's tactic. He held out a folder and said, "Thought you should see this. It's a formal statement from the HOA board. We're relinquishing any claim to the beach, clarifying our past misstatements, and acknowledging your full ownership. Officially. Publicly." I took the folder and flipped through it. It was clean, stamped, signed by every current board member. "Thank you," I said. He smiled. "Some of us didn't realize how far we'd let things go. You reminded us that titles and signs mean nothing without truth." I nodded. "That's all I wanted from the beginning." As he walked off, I turned and looked at the horizon. The sea stretched wide and glittering, waves soft against the shore. It no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like mine. Not just because of a deed or a ruling, but because I had fought to protect it from ego, from lies, from control disguised as community. That evening, I walked barefoot along the waterline, letting the tide chase my step. The air smelled of salt and jasmine again. The cottage lights behind me glowed warm and steady. Somewhere inland, Karen was probably in another neighborhood, maybe one with new rules to twist, new neighbors to manage. But not here. Not anymore. This stretch of sand was quiet now. Steady. Free. And I planned to keep it that way.